Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. Earlier this year, I picked up this Camelback straight edge at an auction where a stamping plant was going out of business. It's 24 inches long and about an inch and a half wide on the base. It's got a stamp on it that says Thompson Products, but I can't find any reference to them as far as making straight edges. And it looks like it might have been stamped in here, either by hand or certainly after it was cast. There is a number that's cast in it, this 4920, but again, I can't find any reference to that. It almost looks like a brown and sharp, but there's some details on it that suggest that it's not. This thing has certainly been well used. If it was ever scraped, it has no remnants of any scrape marks anywhere on it. It's kind of smooth, but it does have a lot of score marks in it. Since I want to expand my knowledge in rebuilding machines, scraping in slideways and stuff like that, I figured I could use this as a learning experience and scrape in this straight edge and actually use it as a reference. Earlier this year, I spent a few days up at Ron Grundy's shop in Milwaukee, and I scraped in, or at least started to scrape in, this prism straight edge that I got as a raw casting from Dennis Foster. I really love how this turned out. It's got that scraped look to it, of course, and it is pretty flat. I mean, at least as flat as what my granite surface plate tells me it is. 100% of the scraping on this prism was done with this hand scraper that was gifted to me by Ron over many, many days, many hours, to the point where I actually developed tennis elbow in my right arm from the repeated abuse I was putting it through. But for this Camelback straight edge, I'm not going to scrape it by hand. Although it's pretty small and probably wouldn't take a ton of effort, I want to try something a little more advanced. Ron has let me borrow this old Biax power scraper. It's pretty old. It doesn't have a variable speed motor on it. It only comes on and off at a single speed. It uses these detachable blades with a piece of carbide attached to the end of it. And I've got a few of them of various radii, various sizes. Well, I haven't really used this thing very much, and I imagine the learning curve might be a bit steep on it. So the only thing I can do at this point is just get started and see how it goes. Well, over here at the granite surface plate, we'll do a little bit of initial inspection. We'll set it down on this and try to pivot it. And it does look like it's pivoting about a third of the way in from each edge, which is actually a pretty good indication that it might already be a little bit flat. Well, we'll take a look, see how flat it might be. We'll do an initial print here using my little homemade bluing compound. Well, I got this recipe from my friend Kyle at Vanover Customs, who got this idea from Wes at Watch Wes Work, but I don't know where Wes eventually got it from. But what this essentially is it's concrete dye mixed with some 30 weight oil. What I like about it is it doesn't dry up. This has been sitting for probably 6 months, although some of the oil might be a little settled. So we're going to add a little bit to it just to thin this up a little bit. The last time I used this batch, I thought it might be a little bit thick, but we'll go ahead and thin it down with some 30 weight oil and spread some out on the surface plate. And before we get too far into this, I want to say up front that this video is not a scraping tutorial. I am not qualified to teach anybody how to do this. This video is just what I did. It is applying some of the stuff that I learned from Ron Grundy, as well as some of the things I've gleaned off of YouTube. Stefan Godesvinter, Adam Booth, Keith Rucker, all these guys are well above my pay grade as it pertains to scraping. And I picked up some little tips and tricks from them along the way, and I'm trying to put them into practice. The only way I think that you really get good at doing this kind of thing is by practicing. And this straight edge, it's going to be a practice piece. Hopefully I'll be able to use it in my machine rebuilding endeavors, but it is going to be a practice piece. And the one thing that Ron told me while I was up at his shop is you really can't ruin these things. You're taking off such little material that even if you take off too much, yeah, it might set you back several hours to fix it, but it's all fixable. I have this rolled up piece of terry cloth that I've been using for a little while. We'll just go ahead and dab it in here to pick up some of this paste, and we'll start spreading it or dabbing it onto the surface plate. I also have this triangular dauber with a piece of leather glued on it, which is real good for spreading out the, chunkier parts of this paste. And then I'll use this ink brailer that I picked up at a local hobby supply store just to get this as thin and even as I can across the entire area. And before I drop the straight edge onto the surface plate, I want to wipe each of these surfaces off with my hand just to make sure that there's no dust particles remaining there that would affect the way that this prints. And that's a pretty interesting print. It is hitting all on the one edge, which is kind of strange. We're not getting any printing, at least not much at all, on the opposite edge. So I got a little bit of work cut out for me. I want to start by rough scraping the surface of the straight edge. So I've got one of the blades with the largest radii, so it'll make the widest cut, and I've already got the power scraper adjusted for the longest stroke. I do want to put some effort into getting this look nice, and what I like to do is take a carpenter square here and just draw a bunch of 45-degree lines on the surface that I'm going to scrape, and I will scrape perpendicular to these lines. And when I come back the other direction, I'll do the same thing. And this just helps me get a good pattern so I can see where I've scraped and where I haven't. And by alternating the direction that the scraper's using, I understand that has a physical effect on the scraping as well. It's better not to be going the same direction each time. So the area that is blue, I will be double scraping it this pass. So I'll be scraping it by itself, but then I'm going to rough scrape the entire surface of the straight edge also. I know I'm going to have to probably take a good half a thousandth of material off of that high spot, and this just helps me get there. Well, these scrape marks are actually looking a little bit short. I thought I had this adjusted for its longest stroke, and I guess I didn't. So I need to find the Allen key that's down inside this hole, this screw, and adjust it so that the stroke is longer. Well, that should give me just about the maximum stroke. I did come off of the maximum just a little bit. I don't know if it's good or bad to have that thing maxed out or even at the minimum, and I should get a longer roughing stroke. During this initial scraping, I want a good wide and long stroke in order to remove as much material as I can. And as I start to get this thing flatter and flatter, we'll try to refine that. I was hoping I was going to get away with using this utility cart to hold the straight edge while I'm scraping, because it's right behind the granite surface plate, but this thing just is moving all over the place. There's no way that this is going to work and give me the results that I want. So I need to find an alternate means of holding this thing. Unfortunately, it just won't be as convenient. Well, I brought this contraption over here to the Bridgeport, and I've got it clamped down to the Bridgeport table, so that should be plenty rigid enough. Interestingly, that was exactly the place I was doing this scraping when I was at Ron's. I was doing this on his Bridgeport table. So this is a much more rigid setup, and it should afford me a little better opportunity to at least do this comfortably, trying to find the right height to where I'm not hunched over, but I can also see the surface is a tricky balance. Well, that's pass number 1 in the books. It'll be interesting to see how many we have to go through. It doesn't look the greatest. I'm still trying to figure out how to hold the Biax scraper, get it at the right angle. I do notice that the other folks I've seen online that are using these things, their blades are much longer. I imagine that affords them a little bit more flexibility in the blade, where this one's going to be a little bit stiffer. But it is what it is, and it's what I have to work with. So we're going to go ahead and mark out the surface with some guidelines the opposite direction, and we'll take another pass, this time perpendicular to the last. Well, I have another mixture of this concrete dye and oil that's more red, and I want to go ahead and rub it on the surface here, and this will just help take the shine off of the surface and also allow me to know where this pass of scraping is going. If I didn't do this, I think it would be a lot more difficult to see and differentiate between the first pass and this second pass. This angle that I'm trying to do this at right now is very awkward and not very comfortable. So I want to adjust this and get this straight edge in a little bit more of a position that I can get at it from both angles without having to shift it and make it a little bit more comfortable for me. Well, this should be a little bit better. We'll see how that proves out. But back to this rough scraping. And again, I'm just roughing at this point. I'm just trying to scrape the entire surface with the scraper and learn how to use this thing, because this is proving to be a little bit more difficult to handle than I was anticipating. The internet makes this look so much easier than it is in person. Well, that's 2 passes. We'll check our progress. It doesn't look great, but I'm getting somewhere anyway. This is kind of like how I feel about TIG welding or even MIG welding. You can tell somebody exactly how to do it, but until they've put down a mile of weld on some practice pieces, you're not going to get really good at it. It just takes practice and repetition, and I think this is the same thing with this scraper. So after cleaning off all of the dye now, I went ahead and stoned it lightly just to remove any burrs. And I'm going to put that red dye back on here. And again, all it's doing is cutting down on the shine, and it will help the blue be a little bit easier to see, so I know where I need to concentrate on the scraping. It might look like I'm putting this red on here pretty thick, and frankly right here I am, but I will be wiping off the majority of it. The oil has sort of separated from the concrete dye, and I really need to mix it up again and maybe make this a little bit thinner, because I really only want a very, very thin layer of this red-orange on it for when I go to print it. Well, back over here at the surface plate, before I put the straight edge down, I do want to go ahead and even out this dye again and get it nice and consistent, at least as much as I can across the area where I'm going to drop the straight edge on. Let's see if we made any progress. We still have some really heavy bluing on that one front edge, but I am picking up a little bit more on the back edge. So I am making some progress, but I've got a little bit more to go. Well, I do still have some considerable high spots, and I want to concentrate the initial scraping there. So this little spot in the middle here, I want to not do that as heavy. I'm going to double scrape this again. I'm going to take 4 passes essentially. The first double pass, I will do the area that has the blue, and then I'll go over the full area, and then I'll come back and do the same thing perpendicular to the first run. And as I did before, we'll set up some 45-degree guidelines. So this first run, again, I'm just trying to hit rough scraping around that area that has the blue pattern on it. I'm not doing anything special. I'm not trying to get all of the blue to scrape out. I'm just generally in that entire area. So with that blue area scraped, now I'm going back over the entire surface of the straight edge and scraping everything. I'm trying to cover all of the surface of the straight edge, and I'm finding it difficult right now to get comfortable with a speed, with an angle to where I'm getting some consistent patterns in the scraping. It seems to either I'm moving too slow or I'm moving too fast. And again, that's kind of the purpose of this straight edge, really, is to practice a little bit with the Biax power scraper. Like I said in the beginning, this one is borrowed, and eventually I'd like to find one of my own. They come up at auction from time to time, and maybe I'll try to find one in 2024. But I need to get better at it, and I can't really ruin this straight edge, at least not any more than it was when I bought it. So I'll stone off the surface here just to remove any burrs that might have been pulled up by the first pass. And I'll use some more of that red dye to take the shine off of the scraped area and come back the other direction. It's interesting that I feel like coming from this direction, I'm a little bit more comfortable. The scrape marks seem to be a little bit more of a pattern rather than a random jumble. Well, it might be hard to see it on camera, but it almost looks like there's less blue on the surface than there was before. And you'd be right if you thought that. It might not seem like it, but I am making some progress. I am finding that I'm breaking up those larger areas in the smaller ones, roughing the areas that have the blue, not going after each individual bit of blue, but the area that's around that blue. And as I do, it will bring that down a little bit closer to the same level as the rest of it. And it might take a few passes to get there, but I am making progress. This is a good thing. I am just concentrating on those areas around where I am seeing some blue printing, and I think this could be the wrong way to do it. I should probably be doing the entire surface of the straight edge again, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm going to just do the blue areas this time, and I'm just going to take a single pass. I'm not going to come back the other direction again before I print it. Okay, so this is interesting. I'm getting a lot more printing on each end of the straight edge and a little less in the middle. And again, I think this is still making progress. I just need to keep roughing until I get a little more even spread throughout the entire surface of the straight edge. Well, by bringing down the two ends of the straight edge, I'm now seeing a few marks near the middle. So again, I feel like I'm making progress in the right direction. Well, I have my little homemade diamond hone here, and it's not an AccuFinish, but it seems to do the trick for me. Just put a little of Windex on here as a lubricant, and this table is permanently welded on the front of this thing at a -5 degrees, so I should be getting a pretty good edge on this, and I am. I think it's a 3000 grit diamond wheel on the front of this, and it seems to be working pretty good. One of these days I need to finish this thing and put a cover on it. Well, with the blade sharpened now, I can get back to some more roughing passes. Well, with each pass, I'm getting more and more distribution of printing across the surface of the straight edge. So I am definitely moving in the right direction. I don't know if I'm moving too fast or too slow, but I feel like I am continuing to make some progress. So we'll keep doing these roughing passes here for a little while yet. Well, it is a little bit interesting. At times I feel like I'm taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. This print looks a lot different than the previous one. It's heavy on one end, but it seems to be lighter across the rest of the straight edge. And I don't necessarily think that this is a bad thing. I don't have enough experience to know if this is still going in the right direction, or if maybe I made a mistake on the previous pass and I'm just now having to recover from it. Well, I am noticing that the further along I get, the smaller these bearing points are getting. And I believe that's a good thing, because I want a lot of small bearing points consistently spread throughout the surface of the straight edge. So I think I am making progress in the right direction. Maybe a little slower than I'd want, but patience is key here. I'm going to take one of the smaller radius blades here and hone it on the diamond wheel, because I'm going to switch out to a smaller blade. And I'm also going to shorten the stroke on the Biax. I'm kind of transitioning now from that roughing stage of scraping into something a little less, a little closer to targeted. So I'm going to try to target the higher blue spots a little bit more than just trying to scrape an area. And after a few more of these sort of more concentrated scraping, see, I'm getting a lot more consistent, smaller bearing points across the surface. So I'm pretty happy with how this is progressing. I have a long way to go yet. It's not where I would want this to be for a reference piece, because eventually what this straight edge is going to be used for is as a reference. And that means I need to have a lot more of these bearing points, and hopefully a lot smaller ones, before I would call this finished. Well, I think this is starting to look really good, although I've got some heavy concentration here. There are some spots now on the surface which don't have very many bearing points at all, which means these heavy areas are still a touch too high. Now, too high might be a 10,000th of an inch, but it also means I'm not getting a consistent bearing across the entire surface. So again, this is going to be more passes of the same thing, and now I'm really trying to concentrate on those higher spots. You look at the spots of the blue, and you can see some that look like it's light blue in the center versus the dark blue around it, and those are an indication that bearing spot is higher than the ones around it. So those are the ones that I'm looking for. We're looking to knock down those high ones and expose a little bit more of the lower ones. What I'm trying to get to is a place where the peaks of all of the high spots are on exactly the same plane, and that there's very many of them, and that they're consistently spread throughout the entire surface. And that's, something that's going to, again, take me many hours, maybe years of practice before I can achieve anything close to that. But the only way you get good at any of this stuff is by practicing. So I got this surface plate from an auction, of course, and I don't know what grade it is. I'm pretty sure it's probably a class B at best, and it's got a few nicks in the surface, so I know it's seen better days. but I don't know if there's any significant wear in any of the corners or anything like that. I have no way of measuring the flatness of this surface plate or even mapping it out. I don't have any of the fancy tools. But what I do want to do here is I'm going to try to take a print the opposite direction from the direction I have been going, just to see if I am getting any difference between one way or the other. If there's significant wear, say in one corner of this thing, because that's where its life had been used, it obviously it's going to affect the print on the straight edge, and this will at least give me an idea if I am chasing my tail and not using a good reference to begin with. I'm sure that I'm not, but for the kind of stuff that I do in my shop, it's probably good enough. I would love to have a nice big A-bomb sized surface plate. I just don't have the room for anything close to that in my tiny little workshop. We'll get the straight edge on this diagonal of the surface plate, and it's pivoting in, sort of the right spot there near that second rib on each end. This end maybe not as much, and if we look at the bottom of it, there's a lot of bearing points there, but yeah, you can see on that one end where there's a little less than the rest of it, but it is getting more and more even across the entire surface. I don't feel like I'm done here yet. I feel like I need to do a little bit more. These large blue areas, I want to try to break those up. So I'm doing a little bit more targeted scraping on some of the heavier blue spots. The idea is taking one blob of blue and maybe turning it into 4 tinier specks of blue. And again, trying to hit those real high spots to try to bring them down just a little bit and maybe expose some of the lower spots that didn't get printed. We'll do another print here after that last pass, and we'll do the little hinge test here, and it seems to be pivoting around that same second rib, maybe not exactly, and the same on this side, and that's looking pretty good. If I turn it over, I'm getting a good even distribution of points. I think there's still some low spots, but my back is killing me, and I need to take a break from this. I think overall this is pretty good for now. There's a little bit of a blank spot there I think I could do a little bit better with, but the rest of it seems to have a fairly good concentration of bearing spots. Could I use this as a reference right now? Probably. I'm not sure that I'm going to leave it here though, but I do need to take a little bit of a break for now. One of the ways I can check to see how good of a surface this is by using this 1" by 1" little window that's part of the Biax tools. And the idea is to count how many bearing points are inside the square, and if it's consistent. This one is not consistent. There's some better spots, and the more tiny spots that you can get on your surface, the better it is. Well, I think I'm going to leave this here for now. My back is killing me. I need to take a break from this, and I think this might be good enough for now. I'm not going to necessarily use this as my reference. I do want to get this little dead spot in the middle figured out, which might mean that I'm going to need to start over, not quite from the beginning, but might need to back up a few bits and do a little bit more rough scraping of the entire area in order to get rid of it. But really, for being the first time of really using a power scraper, I'd say it was a learning experience, and I think I did okay. Well, truthfully, it wasn't my first experience with the power scraper. I did take this piece of cast iron that I had laying around, and I played with the power scraper on this a little bit a couple of months ago. And although I think it came out okay, again, I think it leaves a lot to be desired. I may return to this as a practice piece and maybe try to get it super flat. And once I feel comfortable doing that, then revisit the straight edge. And all of this is leading up to the subject matter of this book, which is Machine Tool Reconditioning by Edward Connolly. I've barely started glancing at the different pages in this book, but there's some really cool things. But it is really considered sort of the Bible of machine tool rebuilders and techniques on hand scraping. Although I will say, since this book was published, this idea of a power scraper sure is a lot different than the Biax that I used in this video. But scraping a straight edge is not even scratching the surface for machine tool reconditioning. It's how to scrape in a saddle of a lathe, how to measure how flat it is, how to measure how parallel it is. There's all sorts of tips and tricks in here on how to do that, and that means I'm going to be making or having to find a lot more tooling before I can really start going in on rebuilding that South Bend lathe, or even the shaper that I'd like to do this with. But that's going to have to wait for another day and maybe another video. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber. And if you'd like to support the channel in other ways, there's some links in the description on how to do that. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.